one of them. Good prayer for Mark as well, and cook at our retreat. And I should say Dr. Mendoza, because he's a doctor of music composition. Thank you. And he teaches at University of Miami, New World, and Miami-Dade College. Been practicing since 1999, I believe that's what he said, up in Cypress Trees Zen Center in Tallahassee. However, he took a break and stopped and came back here. I don't know how many, 8 years ago you've been here?
2019.
Oh, 19. Oh, so only 5 years. Okay, very good. So David will do the Dharma talk. Now let's do Abbott. Paul Forum will be answering questions, and he's lived all around the world, Zimbabwe and Japan, Nepal, and he's flown airplanes and scuba dived into buildings. And he's lived in a very exciting life. And he's an educator. He helps place teachers and principals at international schools around the world. So they contact him and he interviews them, and he does that. And he's practicing with us for about 16 years, I believe. So he'll answer questions, and it's okay. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is going to be a fun talk. I don't think I'm going to get into like my whole life, early life kind of thing. I'm going to just jump right in and talk about the 3 things I admire about Buddhism. So it's going to be kind of like a YouTube video. But first, I just want to say that I'm really curious about history and about the spiritual practice of Buddhism in general. So I always like to know, well, how many different kinds of Buddhisms are there? You know, what is Buddhism and all this stuff. So we have a great book in our school. It's the book that you get when you become a Dharma teacher in training, called The Compass of Zen. And I recommend it because it explains a lot of things about our school. And when you get into the middle, which is where I am, about in the 150s, they explain, the sutras. And it's pretty mind-blowing, some of the stuff in there. But I've also am interested in Theravada Buddhism, and some of you may not know a lot about that, but in Buddhism, there's basically 2 divisions, and one is Mahayana, which means the greater vehicle, and some people say Theravada is another name for Hinayana, which means the lesser vehicle. Theravada means the way of the elders, and we have a Sri Lanka group that also shares this temple, and they have different robes, and they've got precepts that say that the teachers have to eat before a certain time, and they use the Pali canon, which is in Pali, and the Mahayana schools are mostly in Sanskrit, so that's a very easy way of describing it. And the Theravada schools are very much interested in ethics and cultivating yourself, and their whole goal is to become an arhat and attain enlightenment. They don't have the bodhisattva path. The Mahayana schools, we have this cool thing where you go on this bodhisattva path and you put off enlightenment in order to help other people. So it's a very beautiful, beautiful thing. The Theravada book that I like the most, or just in general about Buddhism, is called the Dhammapada. And it's just a very direct, easy book to read. And you can tell there's short little verses, and you can tell that the monks, 2,600 years ago were like, okay, you memorize this part, you memorize that part, and then 300 years later, they all wrote it down. So I'm just going to pick a random verse here. I think I'll start with the beginning, where they talk about choices. There's chapters on anger, jealousy, the fool. This one is on choices. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. I was like, wow, it's pretty wise stuff. So from time to time I read the Dhammapada, and there are actually some monks that actually have memorized this whole thing. There's a group in Seattle called Clear Mountain Monastery, and there are these two young Theravada monks there, and they have a great online presence. I did a sitting with them, and there was like 25 people sitting online. So I respect that tradition a lot. And with our school, the Mahayana schools, it's really trippy. It's really trippy. We take Buddhism to like the next level. And Tibet in particular, they're so trippy that sometimes they're called Vajrayana or Tantriana schools. They have this wonderful piece of art called the Wheel of Life. And in the center of this wheel, I'm not going to get into the 6 realms that surround the wheel, but in the center of this wheel, there's a picture of a pig biting the tail of a rooster. The rooster is biting the tail of a snake, and the snake is biting the tail of the pig. And they go round and round, biting each other. And that pig represents ignorance. That rooster represents jealousy, anger, hate. And the snake represents delusion or desire. And those are the 3 poisons. And in that center, that's the gasoline that gives rise to all of existence. And you're like, wow, that is trippy. So, and outside of this wheel, there's like the animal realm and the human realm and the godly realm and the hell realms. And it's like, wow. And our karma depends on where we're going to be born. But it doesn't matter if you're born in heaven or hell. You're going to be recycled through the system anyway. So it's really cool. It's really trippy. And you know, in some people in our book, The Compass of Zen, they even say that Zen is a separate thing from the Mahayana schools, because we are so different in the fact that Zazen means sit, Zen means meditation, sitting meditation. So it's a big emphasis on sitting compared to some other schools. And you know, we have these things that, you know, like time doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if it's 1,000 kalpas or this moment. It's the eternal now. And you're like, oh wow, okay, time doesn't exist. There's no future, no past. Okay, let me wrap my mind around that. Some of the sutras in the middle of the book, the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, you're like, oh man, that's trippy. So I can see why Zen is confusing for a lot of people. It's not as direct as some of the other schools that are like, okay, just be a good person, follow the precepts, you know, and you know. So I'll get into this this talk. The 3 things that I admire about our practice is, number 1, discipline. Number 2, direction. And number 3, Dharma community. Okay, so discipline. We have sitting, prostrations. We have retreats. We have to get up early. Some of us are not used to this plant-based diet. Right now, I'm sleeping on the floor because I find it might have some health benefits. And if I ever have to do a retreat, I have to sleep on the floor somewhere. So I don't want to be like, oh my God, I can't sleep. So I'm disciplining myself to sleep on the floor. I was reading that Zen Master Sung San, when he did his 90-day or 100-day retreat in Korea, when he was like 20, 21, he packed and unpacked his bags 9 times. Because he didn't, you know, he was like, I got to get out of here, you know? And you're like, wow, you know, people really push themselves. And he thought, well, okay, tomorrow, let's see if I have a clear mind. And then he would wake up tomorrow, and then he'd have a clear mind. And then the next day, he'd be like, oh man, these demons are coming at me, and my mind is going crazy. I'll wait for tomorrow and see what happens. And he kept doing that. So it takes discipline, I think, to do this practice. And so I'll move on to the next thing, direction. I think people need direction. I talk to a lot of young people as an educator, and you know, it's natural for them to feel lost. And you know, some people think, I need a purpose. But I was watching this Theravada monk being interviewed, and he said, you know, young guy, he's like, before I became a monastic, my life had no purpose. And now that I've ordained, my life has purpose, and that is to attain enlightenment, you know. So I thought, I was like, oh, that's really cool. You know, and a lot of people talk about ordaining as a monk, and all of their anxiety just kind of just disappears. And I was like, wow, that's neat. In our school, I think that word purpose is a very heavy word, and it can put a lot of pressure on people. Like, oh, I need a purpose. So I like the word direction, because you can have a direction and then kind of like come off of it and then come back to it, that kind of a thing. But at least, okay, I have a compass, right? The compass of Zen. I practiced at Cypress Tree Zen Group when I was 19. I was brought up Catholic, and I didn't have a good experience with it. I remember praying the rosary with my grandmother, and my aunt and uncle especially were very, like, they wanted to hear the Mass in Latin. They would criticize the priest if they didn't do the things the right way. And I'm like, where is this coming from? I'm like, this is... So it didn't comport with me very well. And when you're a college student, you're just like open to the world. So I saw an advertisement for a Zen group, and it happened to be a Quantum school. And I went on Tuesday nights, I think at 7, and it was this beautiful Unitarian church with nature all around it. And I met Anne Rudloe, who some of you may have met. She wrote a couple of books. And at that time, in 1999, she was only a Dharma teacher. But she had this aura of wisdom that, you know, hard to explain. Maybe I'm making this in my mind. You know, I don't want to make things, but she was just very silent. And she was kind of like my mom away from home, you know. And I remember her Dharma talks. I remember after sitting for 20 minutes, we would put on our shoes and then go outside and do walking meditation. And she was, I think, a marine biologist or something like that. So she always liked nature. And she would do these zigzag patterns, and she would go fast and slow, you know. It'd always be, okay, are you paying attention? That kind of walking meditation. And I loved it. I loved it. And I found that she did have a lot of wisdom in her Dharma talks. So when I came back here, and what brought me to the practice was that my partner got a job in D.C. As doing contract work with computers for a company called Microhealth. And it wasn't known if I was going to move up there to DC or if I was going to stay here. I had my teaching job at UM, and I was like, oh my God. So I was alone for like 4 months. And so it was like, who am I without this other person bothering me? We've been together 20 years, so it's like, you know, we just have this schedule that every Sunday we go to IKEA, you know, and it's just like, well, he's not here. Can I go on a bike ride? Can I go to the beach? Do I have to go to IKEA? so it was that type of thing. And I was like, you know what? I need support. I need to find a Zen group again. So I Googled, and I found this group, and I came in the door, and I think Gloria was the first person I met. And it just so happened she was a Catholic monk for 12 years. You know, and then I met Socrates, and Socrates said, "Oh yeah, Cypress Tree Zen, we knew Anne. Well, yeah, she passed away. You know, it's very sad that she passed away." And I was like, "Oh my God, she passed away." So that death of a teacher really motivated me to pursue this path even more so than before, because I was like, okay, I'm middle-aged. I need to take things seriously, and it's all about paying it forward. You know, she had given so much to people. You know, every Tuesday night she would drive to the Unitarian Church, put on her robes, and sit like a rock and be there for others. And there were only like 5-10 people, you know. But me and Bill do that at Zen Mystery all the time. We're like, okay, you know, Wednesday night we're going to do it. We're going to do it for the benefit of others. And so I think it's, you know, everything that she invested, I want to invest and give back to others what she had given to me. So, and that brings me back to the third reason I admire this practice, and that's Dharma community. And I think people, they need love and support, and they need connection too. And I think that's what we have with these groups. And I love to see these YouTube videos of these eco villages in Costa Rica where young people are going for months and they're doing yoga and meditation, however weird it may be, and they're learning permaculture gardening, and they're realizing that the earth is where we get our food, not the grocery store, everything wrapped in plastic. You know what I mean? So it's this really back to earth kind of thing that the hippies started that we forgot and hopefully we'll rediscover. And they're creating their own music, and they're living a good life that's similar to our retreats, except maybe without the discipline that we have. And I like to see the temple stay programs too in Korea. That's always cool to see on YouTube, because you see these people that, some of them are foreigners, but some of them are actually Koreans that live this hustle and bustle life. And then they come to the temple and they see all this beautiful nature, and they see the serenity of the Sunims. And the Sunims explain to them, this is 108 steps that you must walk. And if you hit the bell, it represents this, and this has a meaning, and this has a meaning. And they're just brought to tears because they're like, wow, my life is empty. I'm watching movies about the Hunger Games, and I'm distracting myself with music, and I don't know how to be a human being. I don't know what a human being is. And you get back to, who am I, kind of question. So, and they're like, wow, I'm about to be a father, and I don't know what's going on. So they get this serenity with these temple stays, and hopefully our group can also give that to people. But loneliness is a big issue. It's at epidemic levels. Even before the pandemic, people were lonely, and doctors are saying now it's as worse as smoking cigarettes. And in the time of the Buddha, people were close-knit. I mean, people had 10, 12 kids. Your aunt and uncle were in your business. The grandparents are like, what are you doing? Okay, the village raised the kids. Now it's like, okay, you're siloed off. I don't talk to my brother anymore. My grandparents, they're almost dead. It's just like everyone's separate. And you had to go into a cave or into the forest to get any kind of understanding of life. So our retreats kind of mimic that early time when, I think I don't know who was the saint that came up with the Christian monastic order, but he went off into a cave and did his thing, and he said, this is too difficult. We have to set up monastic rules to kind of organize this thing together. So we need community, and I think people a lot of times are distracting themselves with pop culture, and I don't know, if you get, it's only so deep. Sometimes movies have really great messages. A lot of times I'll watch a movie on Netflix and be like, wow, this has like a cool Buddhist message to it. But Taylor Swift only goes so deep. So I think that's all I have to say. So thank you very much. Practice hard and escape the matrix.
Any questions? I'll just mention while you're thinking, if you haven't read Anne Rudloe's books, she's got two of them. One was her first experience. I forgot the name, Butterflies in the Wind or something. It's a very easy read, not a big book. It was one of her first experiences doing a retreat. And then she wrote a much better book, I thought, which I can't remember the name of, which was Lost in the Flood at David's house. I loaned him the book and it went. So Anne left.
I need to order two more copies.
No, don't worry. But it's about her experience with going on a kelche. And it's amazing. I read it at kelche the first time, and it's like, oh my God, this is exactly what I'm going through. Mm-hmm. The scheduled mind, it's 10:02. I've got 14 hours until I can eat, or whatever is going through your mind. She nailed what this was all about, and a really good book. If you haven't read her books, she really had great insights, and she mixes it all with, in the second book, with this her being a naturalist, a biologist, marine biologist, and half of the chapters are about Florida, which is interesting for us because we're in Florida. So she writes about the Everglades, she writes about the ocean, and then the next chapter will be kind of connected in a way. She doesn't go out of her way to make it obvious, but you kind of realize after a while, wait a minute, she's connecting one thing with another thing here. So if you haven't read her book, she was really good. Questions?
How did you learn permaculture? Did you go somewhere or did you teach yourself?
No, I just learned off YouTube.
Okay. Okay.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
You're reading the Compass of Zen as part of what program you're part of? What?
In our school, when you become a Dharma teacher in training, you get this book that explains the forms and the teachings of Zen Master Sung Song. And one of his disciples, I think Hyung-Gak Sunim, helped write this.
Translated.
Yeah. So
It's a heavy read.
yeah, it's a heavy.
It's a thick read. A little bit at a time, but it's got everything in there.
Is that to be a junior Dharma teacher or a
just like a regular
normal?
Dharma teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 2-year program.
You can read it without.
Yeah, you can buy it online. It's
Yeah.
Shambhala. This is
I have a
Shambhala.
copy.
Everything's Shambhala press.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't. I don't read a lot, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And in our school, we don't. We're suspicious of books because our school is very much a direct experience type of school.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a solo retreat this past summer because I wasn't able to go to Kelche, and I never knew what a solo retreat was. I didn't know how. I was like, let me experience that, you know. So I went and I scheduled time. You have to make your own schedule, and then that schedule gets approved by a teacher. And I put in time for reading. So a lot of this was read during my solo retreat because I don't have time. Well, I don't make enough time in my normal life.
Well, could you tell us a little about your schedule? Because it's interesting to me that you put in reading it. What a great idea.
Yeah.
You know, and could you can make it up any way you want it, or
Yeah, you
pretty
can.
much, or
You can make it up. Jose Ramirez, who recently became a Zen master, gave me a very generic one that was kind of like Kelche. And the thing about solo retreats at the Providence Zen Center, they have the residential big building for the Zen Center, and then on top of the hill they have a monastery for Kelche, and then off by the other way there's a cabin that's separated, and that cabin has no access to water. So every day I put in the schedule at 6 o'clock I have to get water, this big thing of water in a wheelbarrow, and then bring it back to the cabin. So I was like, okay, now I'm more appreciative of water. So, and you have to do everything. You have to be the kitchen master, the head Dharma teacher, and it's you get up at 4:30 and you do everything that you would during Kelche, plus some more stuff. Like some people do 1,000 bows a day. I said, okay, I'm not going to be doing that. So I put in 3 sets. A set in the morning, a set in the afternoon, and a set in the evening. And that set in the evening, I really didn't want to do. I did maybe 50, and then I did short bows for the rest. I put in time for yoga, and I thought I'd be like, oh yeah, I get to do yoga. I did not feel like doing yoga. So what they always tell you when you do a solo retreat is stick to your schedule. Because sometimes you may put in work period, and you just think, you know what, I'm gonna go to sleep. And then you wake up an hour later, 2 hours later, and you're like, oh man. But you know what, if you get off your schedule, just get back on. I remember I was doing work period and I went outside and I ran into So Young, and she was like, hi, and you have to wear this necklace around your neck that says, on retreat, do not speak to, or something. So that went out the window. Me and her were talking. I didn't say, So Young, I can't talk. And we were talking about the orchard, and I tried to rehabilitate the trees, And it worked. This past fall, they was just bursting with apples, and that was interesting because all the Sunnis said, ignore those trees, they're dead, and nobody eats those apples except the deers. And I was like, you know what? These trees can be saved. Let me do it. So I mulched all the trees, and yeah, it came out great. But yeah, during the fifth day, I was like, man, I want to talk to somebody because I'm going crazy. So
You got lonely. I was
during the fifth day.
To
and then Jose was like, okay, we'll do some Kongan practice. So then I got the Zoom out and we did Kongan practice. So I got some contact. But yeah, you're in that cabin by yourself and you put in time for like a 30-minute walk. And the great thing about the Providence Zen Center is that there's all this acreage around you in nature, and there's several trails that you can go on. And so you make time for walking, and you do these long walks, and you experience nature, and it's really good. You get to reconnect. And on several occasions, I saw 2 snakes, and I was like, oh my God. Okay, so that's fear and aversion. Oh my God, it's snakes. And then you go to your cabin, and you're like, you realize that, oh, okay, Rhode Island doesn't have any poisonous snakes. It's rare that you'll ever see a poisonous snake in Rhode Island. So I was like, okay, there's nothing to fear. Just leave them alone. One particular morning, I woke up, and after prostrations, I went out to the porch. They have a little porch, and I sat on the porch, and I was breathing, and I could see my breath. And I was like, wow, it's June, and I can see my breath. It was like in the 50s or something. Wow. And then one day I saw a deer, like way down in the forest. And I was like, oh my God, that's a deer. That's a deer. And we kind of like connected. And I was like, you know what? That's so cool. But if I move, that deer's gonna run off. Sure enough, I'm like, well, I gotta get up. So I got up and it moved. It ran away. I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. So I don't know what that is. Maybe that was a couple of seconds of enlightenment, but me and the deer became one. Other than that, everyone asked me, oh, did you get an experience? I think that was like the closest one. Everything is just normal. I ate well. There's a plan at Providence Zen Center where you can buy your own food, or you could go into the Zen Center and eat what the Zen Center has to give you. And I was like, well, I don't want anything to do with the Zen Center. I'm on a solo retreat. I should be like, in some mountain somewhere. So I bought $70 worth of food, and I had a lot left over. So I ate good. I made sure I cooked well. Yeah, good question. Any comments, Paul?
Questions? Any questions? Or comments? Or insights? Or thoughts?
So, first of all, David, thank you so much for giving this talk. And you're just a joy to practice with, especially on Wednesday nights. The sutras, I practice clear mind, mindfulness, But when some people ask about the lineage of our school and this and that, I'm so thankful you're there to explain it, because very knowledgeable in that area. And it's a pleasure to have you there. And another thought about when you were talking about Anne Rudloe, she used to come here on retreats, and she was dying of cancer at that time. Her husband would drive her here, and she would always say, well, my body's shot, I'm dying of cancer, but my mind is clear. Very clear, she said, And pretty clear, you know.
Mm.
And her husband would always bring her here, but then he wouldn't sit with us. He'd sit out in the kitchen or whatever, you know. And as soon as the retreat was over, the two of them would right to the Everglades and go swamp walking and stuff, you know, out there, you know. And another little tidbit about her, she was one of my favorites, and I really did a lot of research on her. That they ran this research up by, where was it? I don't even.
Tallahassee area.
Tallahassee. And I guess there's a lot of marshes and this and that and wetlands and everything. And they actually ran a research center, and they would sell their specimens to different universities and things, you know. And when they first got started, they needed financing, and they used to write to John Steinbeck. You know, John Steinbeck is a marine biologist, you know, and it was so interesting to get into that, her life a little bit, you know. Has nothing to do with really our practice, but I found it amazing that they would correspond, and so yeah, she was a pretty special lady. But
She used to do solo retreats, and she writes about this in the second book. Solo retreats, she would go alone out into the middle of the Everglades and just have a simple little like pup tent, and you can imagine between the mosquitoes and the wildlife. I mean, she had these horrifying experiences where it would be the middle of the night and she'd hear, you know, I was going to say a lion. We don't have lions. You know, other creepy things. And you know, it was this whole mental thing of trying to mesh herself with this very rough environment, and she did that many, many times. That's in the second book. It's quite an interesting person. Yeah, when she came and sat here and she had cancer, I remember the last time she came, and I remember it mostly because I was doing moktak, which means you clean this room, right, at work period, and every meal she just left a complete mess everywhere. It was like a baby had eaten and left food everywhere. We had to wash the cushions and do all kinds of things, but she was here. And this was right in the last stages. She didn't die too long after that. But man, she sat here like...
That's remarkable.
It was amazing.
In my insight.
It was amazing.
To be able to do that, look at, face yourself and
Yeah.
face.
She was amazing. Really strong will to do things. So, other questions?
Yeah, you just said moktak, but I thought that was the thing you hit.
Yeah, it is.
But
the person who does the moktak during retreats, during the work period, one of the jobs is with the head Dharma teacher to keep this room clean.
Oh, okay.
And she was a real effort to clean up after, I gotta tell you. It was a mess.
So what does moktak mean?
I don't know.
Is it?
It's like piano. It's like the name.
Fish.
It's something that I think originally was like a wooden fish.
I've seen that. It still is.
And Zen, if you ask what it means, you just pick it up and.
Yeah. There was the koan.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just finished a book this week that someone whose husband recently died just came and stayed with us for 4 days. And she's a Buddhist and he was a Buddhist, and we were in Nepal together. And there was a doctor, a very well-known doctor in Nepal. He was Canadian, and as a brand new doctor, way back in the early 80s, he went to Nepal not knowing what he was doing, and he decided to get involved with trekking, because you know, people go trekking innocently of all ages, and they get to a certain altitude and then they get altitude sickness and get really ill, and some people die. There's all kinds of intestinal diseases in Nepal. I mean, when you live there, it's just absolutely constant. So he became this high altitude doctor for 2 years, learned on the practice basically. He realized how little he knew about any of this. And it's really his memoir. He lives in, I think Jackson Hole, Wyoming or something. Now he has to be quite an old man, must be in mid-80s or something. But fascinating story, and what happened was he took this whole doctoral medical practice, and over time realized, being surrounded by Tibetan Buddhism, which we were all surrounded by in Nepal, just how Buddhist he became. He really became Buddhist. But Tibetan Buddhism, and it's one of the reasons it never caught with me when I was living there. I mean, I was fascinated by it, but it was very magical. All right, everything is magic and fantasy, and he has all these stories in the book about this old monk dies. The guy was like in his 90s, and he died, and it was hot. It was the summer, and they called him, and he went to the monastery, and there the guy was, dead in his bed, kind of thing. And it had already been a few days while he was walking there, and he expected to walk in the room and just have stench and the whole thing. And he walked in, and there's this sweet, flowery smell in the room, but there was no incense, there were no flowers, there was nothing in the room. And he couldn't get over it. The guy wasn't decaying at all. He wasn't showing any of the symptoms that are common when anybody dies. So he went to another Rinpoche there, and he goes, what's going on? Oh, well, in Tibetan Buddhism, our belief is if you've had a really strong practice, you've really meditated, you've really worked your way up in your practice, this is normal. And they have the same idea, the 49-day thing that Koreans have, 49 days, and then, there's the finding the new body or home or wherever your spirit goes. And he said, he may last that whole time. And if his practice was that strong, he will not decay during those 49 days. And Dr. Slim was like, yeah, right. He wasn't into Buddhism at all then, right? He was a medical doctor. He had been trained in the science of medicine.
And bacteria.
And this guy never rotted in 49 days. It smelled like flowers in the room. And on the 49th day, boom, the room smelled. They took him out and they cremated him. All right, done. And he has numerous experiences where that kind of thing happens, but it's very magical thinking. And Zen is really the opposite of that. We're kind of like, this is it. Keep your eyes open, stare at the floor, boom, it's reality, this is all you got. We're really at the opposite end of that whole thing. So, interesting. I'm glad you talked about this, because we really never talk about this. I don't think I've heard anybody talk about the different forms of Buddhism in all the years I've been coming here. So that's really useful, but they're very, very different from each other, what the focus is. And I know some of you, like your wife is involved in...
This is Pure Land.
Do you want to talk about that a little? Because you mentioned
my understanding of it is extremely limited. She'd be a much better person to answer. So I say that to say that if you read about this later and you find out that it's completely different from what I'm about to say, then you understand it's my ignorance. But the way I understand it is, and it's similar to what you said, Paul, that I guess I describe it by starting out with what stands out to me most, which is the very thing that keeps me from being able to accept it as my kind of practice. And I guess that maybe that's how I define things, is in a way that, this is why I can't do it. That's how I draw that distinction. But the Pure Land seems to be about, like we're in this kind of karma wheel. And really the fact that we're already in this body, it in a sense, it means that like there's, like it sounds so terrible. You're already kind of screwed. Like you got all this karma, you've been coming in and out of all these different lives, and you've just accumulated all of this karmic, stuff, debt. And really the only thing that you can do is basically completely, turn over everything to this particular Buddha, and you chant this, Namo Amitofo, Namo Amitofo over and over and over and over, and your whole life just becomes about focusing on that chant, on that chant, on that chant, on that chant. And the idea is that at that moment, they also have a very strong emphasis on the moment of death. so that in the moment of death, if you've been very, very, very strong practice, you escape the karmic, cycle, and you go into, pure land. So it's called Pure Land Buddhism. I won't say my thoughts about that, but that's my limited understanding of what that is. But there's probably people who could explain it much better than that. But I also read, if you want to read a pretty good book, it's extremely dense about the Tibetan Buddhism, is the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. It's like this thick. I have it in my bookcase, and I've tried to go through it like a few times. I get about halfway, and I'm like, I can't take this anymore. It's like so thick. But he talks a lot about those same kind of miracles, quote unquote. Like the 49 days, and my body's not rotting, and there's a big thing about reincarnation, and I really like. That's what I like about Zen. When I was younger, I had all this kind of magical thinking, and probably, a lot of the stuff that I was doing at that time, which a lot of you are familiar with, about my past, kind of fed into that, and I kind of had like created this whole fantasy, world for myself, and I believed in all this magical thinking, and you create your reality with your thought, which is, a certain perspective is true, but I really like that kind of real kind of like get down to earth approach on it, from that Zen focuses on, is like, put all that down, stop thinking, just the direct moment. That's all that we have, and that for me was, I really needed that, I also had many years ago in my early 20s, I started seeing this therapist, and he was not a Zen Buddhist, but he would just he was extremely confrontational, and he was very harsh, and he was very rough, and he was like, he was like, just shut the fuck up. You don't even know what you're talking about. Get out of the clouds, come back down to earth. And I needed that. Mm-hmm. I needed somebody to kind of really slam me down like that. And so when I got to, when I started practicing Zen with the Japanese school, they were also very kind of disciplined and harsh, and and I liked that. I did, when I was much younger too, I did martial arts for a few years, and I had this Korean Kung Fu master, and he was, oh my God, he was so harsh, and he was like, and I was like, man. So when I got here and I discovered Zen, I was like, everything just clicked. I was like, this is what I need. This is what's good for me, And now I really don't, I don't pay all, I try, and I think a lot of times I'm gotten a lot better at it. I don't pay a lot of attention to what my head is rattling on about. It's just kind of like, it very rarely has yielded anything truly good for me, or you keep thinking like, oh, I had this amazing insight, and I had so many of those, I thought. And within a few months to a year, it's like, it didn't save me. It didn't really end my suffering. It didn't really, So I think staying in this moment, and David said it too. The idea of helping others, which I still fall short on a lot. It just takes me out of myself. I think that for me, that's been the most important thing, is not being in my head. Right?
Yeah.
Well, as David was talking, I was thinking, he was talking about movies and YouTube and all this stuff, and I was thinking about stories. Stories being sort of at the core of how our minds function, how we communicate to each other, how we make sense out of the world. Now, within all those stories we have, since we're making up these coherent stories, we're creating all kinds of delusion and craziness, and then we're attaching to them, and we're believing them, and but at the heart, it's all stories. And, you know, even Buddhism has not been immune to the stories, right? So all these different groups of Buddhists are all, because it's like it just comes out of us. That's just the way our minds work. That's the way we, you know, that's the way we survive as a species, is coming up with common stories that we can all agree around, you know? So I think that's, you know, I was thinking a little bit about that as we're sharing these different, the Buddhists are making up their own stories too, you know? I don't know why the guy smelled like flowers, but
As another scientist.
I don't, you know, I don't know. I'd want to ask that guy some questions about
diet.
What was going on there. But what I also, David, like and related to about your talk is kind of how you went in and out of life in Buddhism, and you know, and I reflect on sort of how do you practice in daily life. You know, how do you take this, what we do here, which is such a separation, and it's really looking at your stories and saying, what the hell, you know, wow, that's just a story. When I'm telling, what kind of stories am I telling myself all the time? I know these are the stories I'm thinking about, and these are the stories I'm telling myself, and cutting through the stories constantly. But then how does it go back into daily life? And I have that experience where it's just like, come here, you kind of get things calm, and all of a sudden you're in life, and then there was a moment where it's like, well, wait a second, I have to put my practice into effect, you know, let me calm down. Somehow out of all of this, you know, the practice has changed me over time, but I don't have a clear marker necessarily where I know it has, and I know I respond to things differently, and you know, but I don't have like this clear like story where it's like, well, I was here and now I'm here and this is exactly how this has happened, you know. But I just identified so much with that because you were kind of like, well, doing my prostrations, there are moments where you're like, wow, this is great. Oh, you know, eye goes away, I'm just listening, the deer appears, you know, and then all of a sudden, I'm losing my mind, I gotta go talk to somebody. You know, want to watch YouTube.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's, you know, for me, I mean, I think it's well, when you said Taylor Swift, then everything opened up and I became enlightened.
You do have 2 daughters.
That's right. It all became clear. So no, it's not. I'm not sure it's a question, but it's just sort of a theme about how does this Buddhist practice, where we separate ourselves and come here, or we take these moments, or we recompass the Zen or whatever, but how does it sort of then integrate into these lives that are just full of stories, one story after another, and competing stories, and you know, and entertaining stories and distracting stories, and you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the Tibetans have a thing they call, like the goal is really what they call non-meditation. Have you heard of this? It's taking the practice into real life. And the monks really work for this, and they know that the secret is to get to this state of non-meditation. So it's being completely present, all right, involved completely, not thinking, all right? That's their goal, all right? I don't know if that's our goal. I don't think we try not to think. I mean, we try not to judge. I suppose it's really close. But that's their goal, this non-meditation. It's the same idea, take it from the cushion into real life. And I've had those same experiences. I had the day I came out of kelche, here I am all blessed out. Oh, I lived through kelche. It's, you know, this was painful but great, and okay, why did I do this? But gee, when can I do it again? You know that feeling. And I called my wife, and she said, well, we got some mail, and there's something really strange in it. I said, what's that? And it was basically that we had lost our homestead exemption in Florida. And retroactive 5 years.
Oh.
So we got a bill from the state of Florida for $17,000 approximately to be paid like now, and I'm like, what the hell? So here I go from bliss, all right, welcome back. And then I found out why this happened, and a member of my own family had signed my name on documents for 5 years in New York claiming an exemption there on a house that we used to own. And it was like, you know, and I was not calm at all. I went completely nuts, and it really bothered me. It was like, I was supposed to be calm and cool, and I'm going around the house fuming that somebody in my own family would do this, and my wife is like, well, you're not very Buddhist, you know. But that is the challenge, right? To bring this, and I do think over time, you do notice in yourself, oh, I would have reacted differently once upon a time, or I would have thought differently about this. But it's hard, and it's not a constant, right? We all go like this.
Yeah, I think there's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go.
No, I just real brief. I think there's people that like work at the gas station. They're perfect bodhisattvas, and there's people like me that just like, man, I want a pizza and chocolate cake as soon as I get out of kelche. You know, and then unexpected medical bill, and I'm cursing the lady on the phone. So, yeah, that's. I think that's just the whole purpose of practice is to like tame the people that need it. Like,
there are lots of those moments where you're like, what kind of a crappy Buddhist am I?
I know.
Like, why do I even do this?
Yeah. Or you might have somebody else saying that to you.
Well,
yes.
Maybe you need to go back to your meditation a little more. You know?
yeah, I get that from my partner.
Yeah.
On Wednesday night sometimes, you know, we talk about, your practice, you know, but your practice doesn't end at 7:30, you know, you can take it out on the road with you now, you know, you'll be a better driver because you're 100% focused, you know. And I remember one night I just asked the group, who during the day has a thought about our practice, about helping bringing it back to the moment? And everybody raised their hand.
Yes.
So I think it's just a reminder during the, you know, everything we do are tools, you know, even this Dharma talk, you know, I've heard many Dharma teachers say, okay, talk's over, forget it all now. Come back to before thinking, you know, in this moment, you know. But we can always have moments where we think about a concept or a story to help us come back to that moment, you know. And I've asked so many people, and one of the many times they say, oh, I remember that one story you told me about the two monks walking down the path, and there was a woman down by the creek bed. And you've heard it all, right? I'm sure. Right. Have you heard it? Well, there's two monks walking down this path.
Muddy Road.
You want? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's called Muddy Road. You can look it up on YouTube. But yeah, they're going down the Muddy Road, and there's a junior monk and a senior monk, and they meet a woman, and she needs help crossing this nasty muddy road. And so, without thinking, the senior monk grabs her, picks her up, and takes her across safely. And, oh, thank you very much. And then the monks go on their way, and the junior monk is just like, oh my God, I can't believe you touched a woman. That's against the precepts, all this other stuff. So he's just thinking that in his head. And then they go down many miles, and the junior monk can't take it anymore. And he goes, I can't believe you picked up that woman. And the senior monk says, oh, I put her down miles ago. You're still carrying her. So part of that story is flipped back on you. Like, what are you carrying? And we're carrying a lot of crap. We're carrying a lot of crap in our head. And there's also a tiny little story about the precepts, when to keep them. It's mostly about what you're carrying.
Yeah, I mean, I was about a half an hour ago. I was trying to think of a question, just because I did want to just make a statement about your talk. But in the meantime, with everything else we've talked about, I can't get out of my head how good we would all be on some like Buddhist comedy show on the road, because we each have such funny things we say that we're not even trying to be, and it just spills out. And I just think it would be very entertaining for the rest of the world, especially if we wore our robes while we did it. And then when you were talking about Costa Rica, I've been obsessed recently reading about ayahuasca and ketamine, and I'm like, oh wow, what if we were all in Costa Rica and we did the 24-hour ayahuasca? But what my sincere, true from my heart is, David, that was just so beautiful and so open and so genuine, and you must just be such a lovely teacher at those 3 schools that you go to. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate you, and thank you for what you shared.
Okay, thank you.
Any last questions or comments?
Sign me up for the Costa Rica trip. Different kind
It
of
might
retreat.
sort us all out, who knows? It could sort us all out. We don't really know, but that's what I hear. Oh my God, I love it.
Okay. Thank you for a very good talk.
It was beautiful.
Thank you, Paul, too.
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Can we just do our meeting here? Or?
Yeah. The little